Hello, and thank you for stopping by. This is the first video like this that I'm making, which is why it may sound amateur and it has poor microphone quality, which I apologize in advance for. I just felt the need to make this video quickly since the topic at hand is horrifying, and I thought that my voice could be useful while discussing it based on my personal experience. However, this is a sensitive topic, so if you aren't comfortable hearing about anti-LGBTQ plus discrimination, gender dysphoria, mental health issues, and suicide, please proceed with caution. This video concerns legislation and proposed policies in the US centering around gender-affirming healthcare. Specifically, Marjorie Taylor Greene's bill, H.R. 3492, the Protect Children's Innocence Act, and Dan Crenshaw's H.R. 498, the Do No Harm in Medicaid Act, as well as RFK Jr.'s planned funding cuts to hospitals and Medicaid coverage that offers gender-affirming care to minors, which he plans to redirect the funds for towards children who regret their transition, to which I am one of them. So the bills and funding cuts would essentially criminalize the distribution of gender-affirming care to transgender minors in the US, which is terrifying for a lot of people. Marjorie Taylor Greene's bill in particular would put medical professionals who provide gender-affirming care to minors in prison for up to 10 years, which I should not have to say is heinous. What prompted me to abruptly make this video was discovering that RFK Jr. brought on Chloe Cole to speak during a press conference, a detransitioned woman, to argue for the cause of banning gender-affirming healthcare to minors. I am also a detransitioned person, albeit one who has never undergone HRT or hormone replacement therapy. However, I cannot fathom how anyone, including a detransitioned person, finds these proposed changes to be acceptable. My intention with this video is to offer an additional perspective on this issue from someone else who is formerly identified as transgender. I'm a middle-class, white teenager, and I live in an accepting household in a blue state, having only experienced mild transphobic discrimination while I identified as male. I mention those factors because my experience is different from other people who formerly identified as transgender. My intention is not to stomp over anyone's experiences or come off as pretentious or morally superior. I simply wanted to share my thoughts and experience with a topic that deserves our attention. I also encourage you to share your thoughts in the comments under the condition that you don't harass, leave bigoted sentiments, or promote violence against anybody. Lastly, don't just listen to me. Listen to the perspectives of transgender people alongside this. Transgender minors, transgender adults, and supportive caregivers of transgender children will be directly impacted by this legislation, so prioritize their perspectives over mine. I can't speak for the transgender population, just my experience. I apologize if this sounds abstract, as explaining my psychology is difficult. Right when I turned 13, I felt a strange shift in my body, if that makes sense. I didn't feel like myself, and my emotional health and the way I treated other people took a steep decline. While today I speculate that this was a result of puberty, mental health issues, and a potential neurocognitive condition on one side of the family, I tied this at the time to gender dysphoria. I'm not good in being in tune with my body. I used to have trouble reacting to my name and figuring out what I needed physically and emotionally and fitting in with other people, so I could easily confuse these symptoms with gender dysphoria. Before I transitioned, I'd been testing the waters for a while to see if I was queer. I got my hair cut, I told my family and friends they could refer to me with both my birth name and a male name, and I had identified with various sexualities and gender non-conforming labels to describe myself. Eventually, I came out to my parents, who were supportive, and I identified as a gay transgender male and stuck with that label for 2 years. I didn't know then, but I felt more trapped than before as a boy. I felt more trapped by the societal expectations of men than I did women. I didn't like the masculinity that I presented. I was very petite by male standards, and my feminine appearance made me feel strange, and I hated my voice that I purposely tried to deepen and sounded like a tiny Charles White. All this disgust with my femininity only occurred after my transition. I had never felt dissatisfied with my assigned gender of female until I tried to live as a boy. I even once referred to being transgender as one of the worst things that could happen to me, even if it was just my masculinity that I hated. I just didn't know it then. When I was 15, I realized that I still liked wearing dresses. Out of curiosity, I grabbed a dress from a bag of clothes that we were going to donate, went to the bathroom, put on my mother's makeup with the dress, and took some pictures. I felt the sense of peace with myself for the first time in a while. Satisfaction confused me, and I took the dress off and makeup off. I tried to convince myself that it was just a fetish and I didn't like wearing it casually. However, the facade slowly crumbled, and I wasn't even surprised by the time I'd hit sophomore year and realized that I wasn't transgender. I stopped cutting my hair and casually contemplated buying a top that showed off my chest to attract a boy, as ridiculous as that is. Thus, I began my detransition. More than anything, I was excited to wear women's clothing again. The only significant impacts have been on my voice, which tends to stay in a lower range, but it's always had a somewhat flat quality, so it doesn't bother me. Today, I identify as a cisgender female. I am lucky to feel confident in my body by wearing the clothing I want, using the name I want, and socially identifying the way I want. A lot of transgender kids would dream of that. This is why it infuriates me that people who use those who detransitioned as an argument to take away the rights of transgender people. Why would somebody who took HRT and permanently changed their body to their dislike want to take away gender euphoria from others? It is not the healthcare itself that caused the negative outcome. It is the misguided decision to use that healthcare in the first place. I am lucky to have no lasting negative impact on my body and mental health from my transition, which I recognize is not the same for everybody, such as Cole. However, if I had more than a slightly deeper voice, the last thing I'd want to do is give children the negative experience with my body that I had. While I only felt gender dysphoria when I changed my gender, most others who have identified as transgender and felt gender dysphoria with their assigned gender at birth. The minority of cases such as mine are not an excuse to take away gender-affirming healthcare. I was not confused for 2 years because I was introduced to transgenderism. I was confused because I personally did not know what I needed for my mind and body. It's up to people to educate their children, listen to their children, and accept their children, not support the criminalization of the most effective solution to gender dysphoria for them entirely. No one has the right to take away the piece of gender affirmation from anybody, let alone children, not the Bible, politicians, or those who detransition and regretted it like I did. Gender-affirming healthcare is a human right, and human rights don't have exceptions. Remember how I said not to exclusively listen to me? Listen to medical professionals too. A study by the American Council on Science and Public Health, which surveyed transgender youth who underwent hormone replacement therapy, found that only 6% of participants, most of them being children, expressed regret with their usage of puberty blockers or HRT. With this, we can immediately denounce the proposed bans on HRT. Children changing their bodies for the worst with the intention to feel more comfortable in their bodies is not an issue that is widespread enough to warrant so much pushback against gender-affirming care from politicians. Even then, the scenario can be prevented through collaboration with medical professionals. Furthermore, NPR found that less than 0.1% of teenagers with private insurance even use gender-affirming healthcare and prioritize social transition instead, making these bans even more ridiculous. It is illogical for politicians to spend so much time eliminating a rare threat to queer children while ignoring actual threats such as discrimination and conversion therapy. Statistics have found that children who were threatened with or underwent conversion therapy are 27% more likely to attempt suicide. Furthermore, the National Library of Medicine reported in a 2017 study that discrimination against the LGBTQ+ population is incredibly common. One statistic showed that 57% of 489 queer participants reported being called slurs. It's not like much has changed in 2025 either. I was once at a protest organized by queer people, and as I was walking away, this stranger felt comfortable joking with me by calling the protesters the F-slur. And I live in a blue state in a very queer accepting area. I have heard my classmates use that word too. It is normalized even if this bigotry has real negative impacts. The same study found that those who experience discrimination endure negative impacts on health, limited employment opportunities, and inability to access health care. If politicians truly cared about protecting children, they would protect them from these outcomes instead of, banning healthcare. If anything, these bans will only increase the alarming suicide rate of the queer population. If you would like to skip mentions of that, you can go to the timestamp shown on your screen now. A study by the Trevor Project found that 39% of queer youth have held suicidal ideation in 2024, which included about half of the population of transgender and non-binary youth. Keep in mind, this was in 2024, before the political climate in the US took a nosedive. Another study by the Trevor Project in 2020 found that transgender youth are over 2 times more likely to experience symptoms of depression and suicidality. A life-threatening mental illness will never be cured by taking away healthcare. Never. To suggest that these bills will protect any child is ridiculous. And after hearing all of this, how are these bills anything but harmful? There is logically nothing wrong with being transgender, and transitioning has shown to be the most effective treatment for gender dysphoria. We would not have hormone replacement therapy in the first place if most people in the medical industry believed that it was dangerous. It's only politicians who are enforcing these arbitrary bans, not actual medical professionals. It's also noteworthy that administering HRT and other medical practices associated with gender-affirming healthcare don't just relate to transgender people. Some women use HRT to treat menopause symptoms. Some cisgender women get breast implants. These bans will not just affect the transgender population. The fact that it will harm others shatters the illusion of protecting the youth. Also, a legislator like Marjorie Taylor Greene couldn't care less about protecting children after mocking a survivor of the Parkland High School shooting either, but that's a whole other thing. My point is that the concern of these politicians is not protecting children, but exercising their own bigotry. Politicians should not be involved in what kinds of healthcare and healthcare coverage are acceptable. That's why the iron fist handling of Medicaid, not just in these bills, is absolutely infuriating. In conclusion, these bills are an attack on the transgender population, and they need to be struck down immediately. I understand that a lot of people are terrified, just as I am, and one way that helps me get through this administration has been calling or emailing my elected officials, though calling usually has more of an impact. It puts pressure on your legislators and lets them know that they aren't voting for this and getting off without upsetting people. I can't always find the willpower to do it, and it took me a while to get comfortable with making phone calls, but it does slightly help, and you can just leave a voicemail after their office is closed. You can use the 5 Calls app. If nothing else, there's slight satisfaction knowing you at least tried to help. Furthermore, regulatory agencies like HHS, which RFK heads, are legally required to open a public comment section before a policy change is made, and thus they've released one for the proposed cuts to hospitals that fund gender-affirming care and another for the proposed cuts to Medicaid involving gender-affirming care. Leaving a comment can help stop or slow harmful policies implementation and serve as evidence in court cases if anyone tries to get the policy removed by a judge. Anybody can comment, and as long as your comment is unique, it will be read and counted. I'll drop Leeja Miller's recent episode, which includes both comment submissions and a guide for how to submit a public comment. Lastly, to any transgender or queer audience members, these are incredibly scary times, and I don't have much more advice on how to get through it, and I don't understand your personal experience, but I know that you deserve to express who you are without shame and ridicule. If you have any insight, critique, or just want to share something, you can leave anything in the comments, as your perspective is more critical in this moment than mine is. If nothing else, I hope that this video brings you some sense of community. This sucks. This really fucking sucks. We're bigger, but we're bigger than the politicians who are blinded by their corruption and won't listen to you and won't listen to doctors. We're gonna get through this. Thank you for your time.